Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Growers Live. I'm Josh Satin. I'm so happy to be with you guys here tonight and really excited about our guest tonight and to talk all about compost. And I am really pumped up about this. All of us soil nerds can't nerd out enough about soil and compost. So we have Troy Hinke from Living Roots Compost Tea in Tennessee, and super excited to have him on tonight. And a couple of announcements. First of all, this is brought to you by you guys from Patreon members. And so if you guys are Patreon members, I thank you so much. And if you're not, please consider going to patreon.com/farmerjesse. You can donate for as little as $2 a month and really contribute to the work that Jesse and I and Jackson do at No Till Growers, making these things possible and future content in terms of podcasts and video and all that stuff. So thank you, and please consider that. Schedule-wise, coming up, as I told you guys before, we are doing this every 2 weeks, so every other Tuesday evening. So the next one will be on September 1st. We'll have Alex and Yoko of Osawaga Farm. On September 15th, we'll have Claire Coleman of Four Season Farm. That's Ellie Coleman's daughter, if you don't know who she is. And then on September 29th, we'll have Cliff Davis of Pig and Leaf, an awesome farmer and a friend of mine. And so we're going to keep this rolling, guys. This has taken a lot of time for me, but I think it's important that we connect growers and experts in the field with you guys, and you guys have access to ask them questions and those sorts of things. So anyways, you're not here to see me. You're here to see Troy. Let me get Troy in here. Hey, Troy, how's it going, man?
Hey, what's up?
Hey, welcome to Growers Live. Yeah. Pretty excited. So first of all, just like introduce yourself a little bit, talk about like your background maybe, and your company and the things that you're working on professionally.
Sure, yeah. My name is Troy Hinke. I own Living Roots Compost Tea. I got started in all this back in 2011. I was going back to school, and I happened to be taking a class. I got lucky and signed up for a class with Elaine Ingham and went through a 28-day course with that. And kind of had an aha moment then that it's exactly what I wanted to do with life and what I wanted to pursue for a career. And but I had no experience with a microscope and wanted to go and apprentice with her. She had just started as the chief research scientist at Rodale that year. So that summer I went and spent a month apprenticing with her at Rodale, and then they liked me a lot and wanted to bring me on. So that fall, October, whatever, they got a grant. I came on and worked with Elaine, so I got to work side by side with Elaine doing compost and compost tea research on a large and small scale. And then we were also doing food scrap composting, where we were trying to get the regulations changed rather than like having to turn 5 turns within 15 days. We were looking at focusing on turning according to temperature, which would be focusing on the biology in the pile, and how can we manage compost to get the best biology rather than just kind of meeting requirements like a lot of people do with organics. Anyway, yeah, so I worked with Elaine. I actually lived with Elaine for like 6 months on the farm there, so we were pretty close. From Rodale, came back to Tennessee and started an organic farm with my partner at the time. She and I had a 10-member CSA, so did organic farming there. They had 2 acres in blueberries, which we had to manage. And then I went on to do organic landscaping, work with an organic landscaping company. And then I also worked with a large scale compost facility that's nearby. So I've got kind of a full gamut with organics and composting and how those all tie together. And then 2017, actually Cliff Davis, who's going to be on your show, he was one of the guys who really, I went and taught classes at what used to be Spiral Ridge Permaculture, and he was always motivating me to start my own business. And I just kind of started out thinking I was going to spray compost tea here and there, and it's kind of morphed into more than that, where I do half consulting and half compost tea sprays. So I do landscapes, lawns, gardens, and farms around the Nashville and Middle Tennessee area. I'm mainly working on lawns or landscapes, and then have several farms that I do a few times a year. That's doing compost tea application.
All right, cool. What were you doing before all this? Like, how did you like get into like I'm gonna take Elaine's course and I'm gonna go hang out with Elaine? Like, where did that all come from?
Uh, I had just had, I've always been pretty intelligent, but gone back to school here and there. School was never really my thing,
Cool.
but I always wanted to get back to school. I have a really crazy story about how I went back to school. I don't know if you guys want to hear that, but I ended up going back to Maharishi University of Management. Um, it's kind of weird. There was just like the universe like put these signs together that like was like, you know, you should go here. And then I just happened to sign up for Elaine's class. I had no idea who Elaine was. And then had a few people throughout the year be like, oh man, you got Elaine's class. You're so lucky. And then, you know, took the class and was just like blown away by it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
so before that, I had it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I had an interest in like growing plants and organics and food and things like that, but I had gone back to school to focus on organic food production or renewable energies, and this really catapulted me into what I wanted to do. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, it sounds like you're providing a lot for the community, not just in terms of like nerdy farmers, but also like you said, landscapes and lawns and that sort of stuff. Yeah, what's that look like? You just sent it like for your company. Are you mainly generating? You said you're doing some consulting too, but you're generating compost teas that are applied commercially and residentially. Like, what does that look like?
Right. I make my own compost here at my house. I live way out in the country, so I'm able to compost large and small. Make my own compost and then brew here at home. And then I've got a tank on the back of my truck with a pump hooked up to it and 200 feet of garden hose and a sprayer. So I'm able to access most anywhere with that.
To me, like as an entrepreneur, that sounds like a pretty simple like setup in terms of like gear and stuff. Like you don't need much to get going, it sounds like.
Right. No. Yeah. Just the knowledge. And then, I mean, yeah, my brewer, I teach a lot of the consulting I do is being able to teach people to brew on a budget or building a brewer on a budget. Yeah, because my brewer, I wish I had a really nice conical brewer, but I use a 55-gallon barrel and air pump, air hose, and some PVC pipe. So yeah, it's all pretty inexpensive to get started, other than having to purchase a truck.
You're right, and spending years studying and learning all this stuff. That's the expensive part. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I know that, you know, personally we use a lot of compost, and I'm of the school of like the deep compost mulch system, and I don't want to I want to get to some of the questions before I start like just picking your brain a little bit too. But I'm obviously super excited to like talk all things compost and teas and all sorts of stuff. And just to remind everybody that we always take the questions from our Patreon members first, and then we'll open up for live questions. So if you guys do have questions, please get them in over there in the chat, and I will get to them. We do have a few questions to get through first. And, you know, for future guests, keep in mind that if you'd like to get your questions in and make sure they get answered, become a Patreon member and go in there and you can you get your questions in early. So if I haven't pitched the Patreon enough, you know, there you go. There's another pitch for you guys. All right, Troy. So Peter Alsup asks, what are some baseline criteria for evaluating a nutritional compost beyond the feel and smell? Ideal pH, carbon to nitrogen ratio, moisture content, nutrient content, and other factors. And I know, you know, we were just chatting right beforehand, and you know, you focus more on the sort of the biology aspect and less about the nutrition. Can you talk a little bit, you know, sort of tie into this question and talk on those things?
Yeah. He mentioned a few things in there, so you might need to remind me of what he touched on. It was pH, nutrient value, and
carbon to nitrogen ratio.
Carbon to nitrogen and smell. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, I focus on the biology. Regarding carbon to nitrogen ratio, most people are taught you want like a 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio in a pile. I kind of go off of that. I don't take too strict of measurements when I'm focusing on the carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you're a student of Elaine's, Elaine talks about, there's a whole lot involved here, so I'll try and keep it simple. When you're looking at succession and succession of plants and soil, at the very beginning of succession, you've got bacterial dominant soil, and the plants that are grown from that are going to be mainly getting nutrients from bacteria. And as you move along in succession, you'll have weeds, grasses, bushes, shrubs, and in that middle section is kind of where we have row crops, and that soil is going to be equal ratio of bacteria to fungi. And then as you go along in succession to trees, forests, coniferous forests, deciduous forests, you're getting more fungal dominant. So you've got the same amount of bacteria in the soil, but you've got way, way, way much more fungi. And so through modern agricultural practices like tilling, chemical use, compaction, we're losing a lot of the biology in the soil, and especially fungi, because fungi grows in strands throughout the soil, where bacteria are going to be tiny little specks. You've got fungi that grows like sewing thread throughout the soil. So if you can imagine having sewing thread spread throughout the soil, and if you come along with some type of rototiller, you're going to be ripping up all those threads. So we're normally mainly trying to get fungi back in the soil. And I tell that because I'm trying to focus on getting more fungi going in my compost pile. With that, so green materials in a compost pile are going to be more bacterial foods for, green material is going to be foods for bacteria. Brown materials are going to be foods for more foods for fungi. So if we're trying to get more fungi in a pile, we want to have more brown matter than we do, or we want to tip the scales more on the brown matter than in green matter, because we're trying to feed the fungi more. So I'm actually trying to go for more ratios, not necessarily carbon to nitrogen ratios, but brown to green ratio. In a lot of the things you read, it'll say, like 50-50. It's depending on what type of compost you're doing as well, but most of them say like 50-50 green to brown. I'm aiming for more of a like 60-30 or even a little bit higher than that ratio of higher browns than greens to feed the fungi in the pile. I don't take any type of pH tests on my compost or anything. I don't really rely on pH readings. pH, like with microorganisms, just to kind of be nerdy, in the soil, when you've got bacterial dominant soil or compost, the pH is going to be more alkaline, where if you have a fungal dominant soil or compost, which doesn't happen as often, you're going to have, it's going to be more acidic reading, because the enzymes that bacteria and fungi don't have mouths to eat. They need to release enzymes to be able to break down matter and absorb it and gain the nutrients from that. And those enzymes bacterial enzymes are more alkaline, and fungal enzymes are more acidic. And so because they're excreting those into the soil, the biology actually dictates the pH of the soil. So the biology dictates the chemistry. And beyond that, I don't have a chemistry background, so there's a lot of things that regarding chemistry and biochemical reactions that I'm not able to describe, like in case you get other questions. But yeah. So that regarding the pH. And then as far as nutrients go, like I'm trying to get, for numerous reasons, I'm trying to get a diverse mix of materials in the pile. So with a diverse mix of materials, you're getting more nutrients and minerals into your compost, but you're also getting a diverse amount of microorganisms. So more types of bacteria, more types of fungi, different types of nematodes, different types of protozoa than you would with, say you just use wood chips, leaves, and grass. You're only going to get so many microorganisms that are on the surfaces of those, whereas you have wood chips, leaves, straw, grass, pulled weeds, food scraps, things like that. You're going to get a lot more mix of microorganisms and nutrients. So yeah, as far as finished compost and what I'm focused on, I'm mainly concerned with what I'm going to see under the microscope when I put compost, make up a sample and put it under the microscope, what I'm going to see as far as biology goes.
Okay.
And then with that, I'm wanting to see bacteria, fungi. So in the very first part of the food chain, or why we call it the soil food web, it's the very first part of the food chain in general, where plants photosynthesize and turn energy from the sun and air into organic matter and carbon. And then the first decomposers of that are going to be bacteria and fungi. And just like if you and I were to eat chicken and mashed potatoes, we're going to have those nutrients in our body. And if something were to come along and eat us and poop it out, it would release those nutrients from us in the poop. That's what happens in the microbial world, where you've got bacteria and fungi who are taking up all these nutrients by eating away at exudates and organic matter, and then they've got excess nutrients in their bodies. And when the predators of them come along and eat them, they're going to be that excrement is going to be released, and it's in a plant available form, where the plants can then take up those nutrients and minerals from what we're just eating. So I want to see bacteria. I want to see different types of bacteria, different type of cocci and rods, different shapes. I want to see a diversity of fungi, like different diameters, mainly wide diameter and darker colors. But it's good to see, a dark brown one and a yellow one and a light brown one. And then on top of the bacteria and fungi, I want to see their predators, because if you've got bacteria and fungi in your compost or compost tea, they're going to be breaking down organic matter. But if you break all that organic matter down and then just have bacteria and fungi there, it's not going to be released to plants. You have to have it released to plants by having their predators come along, and I rely on the predator-prey relationship. So I'm also looking for protozoa, which are flagellates, and amoeba, and both of those are going to be eating bacteria. And then nematodes. I'm also looking for nematodes. So there's different types of nematodes, and nematodes usually get a bad name in the agricultural world because people have issues with root knot nematodes, which are the only detrimental ones. Most of any of the nematodes that I see are beneficial. So out of compost and soil, almost any nematode I've ever seen is actually a good one, not a bad nematode. So yeah, when I put it on the microscope, I'm looking for bacteria, I'm looking for fungi, I'm looking for protozoa, I'm looking for nematodes, and then looking also for some microarthropods in there, and then just kind of focusing on organic matter and see what organic matter I can see that's broken down, and minerals and things like that underneath the microscope.
Okay, so how often are you analyzing the compost for all the stuff you've been talking about? Like, is that when it's done? Is that on every pile? Is that like periodic? Like, when are you checking that sort of stuff?
I mean, you can check it for fun during the composting process, just to kind of see where you're at with what microorganisms are working away and present. Otherwise, normally, once a compost pile is finished, I want to, for me, I'm using it to sell compost or to sell compost tea from. So to me, it's very important that I'm making sure that I've got the biology there before I'm going out and using it. So yeah, once I get finished compost, I want to be putting it underneath the microscope. And then every few months, I'm normally rechecking the compost just to see kind of where it's at from sitting out in my yard. Just because I want to know where it's at biologically, if I've lost something, or if I think maybe it's a little dry and I'm worried about it, I might check the biology on it just to see where it's sitting.
Okay.
But yeah, normally when it's finished.
Okay. And so I get this question asked a lot too. Most people don't have a microscope or don't have the skills to do the sort of work that you do, or people who are able to check these sorts of things. Are there sort of ways on a simple level, if you can like for me, like I'll get a pile of compost delivered. Like, let's say you're not making compost, or if you are making compost, either way, like, is there sort of ways that you can just use your senses in terms of like moisture content, how it smells, how it feels, how it looks? Is there anything like really basic that I know you're going to dive in and put it under a microscope. It's totally different. But for most people, like, is there sort of simple ways that we can analyze roughly how things are going?
No, it's tough because of that. I mean, I hear that all the time too. Like,
Yeah.
hey, I don't have a microscope. How am I supposed to know if my compost tea is good or whatever? um, one, I mean, a few determining factors whether you have like good compost being delivered or mulch being delivered. Uh, Most composts that arrive to you that are pretty heavy in wood chips um, are more likely going to be a mulch than a compost and be providing less of a biological inoculation for you. Um, it's going to be organic matter without much biology on it. If it's dry, you're not going to have a lot of biological activity either. All of these microorganisms live on the micro droplets or whatever you want to call it on surfaces of organic matter. So you have to have moisture there. Um, I like to use the analogy a lot of food preservation for different things with soil and compost. One of those is when we are trying to preserve food, like you just made your lasagna last night and you didn't eat it all. And if you let it sit out, um, what's going to break it down? Microorganisms are going to come in, bacteria and fungi are going to come in from the air and start to eat away at that lasagna and decompose it. So humans use airtight containers. We want to keep the air away from food to keep it from decomposing. Or with fruits and meats, we dehydrate things and we're sucking all the water out of there. And by doing that, we're making it so that the microorganisms can't really survive on the surface of those. And so it doesn't get decomposed. So with compost and soils, we're trying to do the exact opposite. And you want to make sure that we've got moisture to keep all those microorganisms alive. And you want to make sure that you've got air to make sure that you've got aerobic microorganisms that you're working with.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, smell anytime you're making compost or getting compost, you can go by your sense of smell. If something smells bad to you, as in like anybody, it's a good gauge for us. I mean, like I thought I heard like a mouse or something in my house. Um, if you can think about us before we became the civilized beings we are now, we'd have to search and hunt for food and like figure out what's good and what's bad. And our nose was a big factor in that. And if something smells bad to us, a plant is a way more sensitive to any type of chemical, anything that's going to be bad in compost or in soils that might be anaerobic. It's going to be a plant's going to be a lot more sensitive than we are. So if we're smelling something that makes us kind of wince or be like, I don't know about that, trust your gut and know that it's not good.
Okay.
So if you've got stinky compost, I've had different people get really smelly soil or compost and be worried about it. If you can spread it out as thin as possible on your garden, it's going to get air and sunlight, and it's going to help it to go aerobic. But yeah, it's most likely anaerobic and is breeding anaerobic
Okay.
microorganisms, which could be detrimental.
All right. So this sort of, I don't know, solidifies some of what I've been telling people, I guess, is like, you trust your gut here. If it smells really bad, it's probably not in good shape, right? Like good soil smells like good soil. Like I don't know how to describe that, but I think that's true. And I
Yeah,
think a lot of people, Troy, like live in an area where they don't have access to good compost, right? There's no one that's making high quality compost, or they're not in a position to make it themselves. And so I think a lot of people, when they get it, they're like, I don't know if this is good. Like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. I bought compost, right? Like, it's supposed to be a certain way, but yeah, like you said, check for moisture, see if it's too woody, right? Is the wood broken down? The smell. I think those are all like solid things. But obviously, you're gonna push people to want to like nerd out real hard and get a microscope. So now
yeah.
I want now
Well,
I every time I talk to like you, and I've had Elaine on the show too, and it was like, oh man, I need to like really get into this. Like, isn't I just like buy compost. I'm like, oh, I'll put the compost out. I got other things to worry about. But yeah, what were you gonna say?
I think it's an important tool. I was going to say, two other things that you could look for is you want to, in compost that you purchase, you really want to see some type of humus or broken down matter that resembles soil, or at least part of that compost should resemble some soil. And you could look for visible mycelium too. If you see little white strands growing on some of the wood chips or the more woody or carbonaceous matter, then you know that you've got good fungi in there at least, and that should be a good sign.
Okay. Cool. I got another question here. I don't know how to pronounce the person's name. Selene or Selene? I don't know. But what's the difference between good and bad compost? And we sort of been talking about this already. I guess it's kind of like, when you're talking like simply like a farmer who maybe doesn't have the advanced knowledge and they're like, is this good? Is this not good? I think we've been sort of talking about that. But, what's the consequence of putting bad compost on my crop? And I'm not really sure what bad means. Like bad could mean a bad mix. It could be unfinished, right? Like I'm not really sure what bad means, but let's say you got compost delivered and it smelled bad. Like, what do you do with it? Like, what's the best strategy? What's the quickest way to get it ready?
Right. Yeah. So if I were to think of bad, I would think that either it's still not, if it's not finished, it's still composting, so it's hot, or it's smelly, or it's bad compost, as in it's just mulch. It's not really a compost. So if it's still hot, if you get a compost delivery and it's still steaming, or if you have a thermometer that you can stick in there and notice if it's, like over 100 degrees, or depending how hot it is outside. Depending on how you use it, you could potentially harm your plants. So if you've got hot compost, if you got a delivery of hot compost that's still really hot and not fully finished, if you were to dilute that down and make a mixture for your starts, like in the spring or in the middle of summer for your fall starts, and you're putting like 10 or 20% compost mixed in with cocoa coir and other amendments and things like that, it's not going to have a bad effect. Your biology isn't going to be in the best place in that compost because it hasn't finished. If you were to let that compost age, it could get better biologically. But yeah, the hot compost could harm plants if you were to do like a deep mulch or deep compost system for like a market farm or something like that, where you're doing like 4 inches deep of compost, and that's like really hot, and then you're putting starts right into that. It could burn your plants really bad and kill all of your plants. So that's hot compost. If you've got smelly compost is, depending on how bad it is.
Hold on. I just want to pause you for a second. If you have hot compost, let's say I order compost and it's hot, it's still steaming. Like, what's the best thing I do? Just let it sit in a pile for a while? Is that the best thing I can do?
Yeah, I would just let it sit in a pile until it gets to ambient or close to ambient temperature. I'm sorry, I meant to answer that.
No, it's fine. Yeah, covered or uncovered? What do you think?
Any time with compost, whether you're making it or have finished compost, you can think of it as a living being. And if you've got a lot of rain coming, you want to keep it covered because you don't want to get too drenched and soggy. If it's not much rain coming, then you don't really need to cover it. But as often as possible, I like to leave my compost uncovered so that it's getting air and has access to the elements, because there's a lot of bacteria and fungi floating through the air all the time that we don't even realize too, that your compost is constantly collecting biology from the air, new bacteria, new fungi that's floating in all the time.
All right. Well, that makes sense. I mean, if the compost isn't finished composting, you need to maintain that moisture level that's in there, so it composts.
Yeah, you want to
correctly.
maintain the moisture level. Make sure that it's staying at 50%, so it's finishing.
Okay, that makes sense. What were you talking about the stinky compost?
Yeah, so for stinky compost, if you've got smelly compost that smells bad, it's anaerobic, which means there's anaerobic microorganisms inside that could be making chemicals that are going to hurt your plant, like alcohols or phenols or things like that. So if you have smelly compost, you could let it age also and turn it. every situation is going to be different depending on how much time someone has or whatever. So if you've got time, you could let it sit. You could turn it with a tractor or by hand just to get it aerated. You'd want to get it to where it's turned from anaerobic to aerobic by adding air or just getting it access to air.
Okay.
If you needed to use it, oh sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Troy.
If you needed to use it right away, you could, like I said, you could put it out very thin, as thin as possible, like up to half an inch. And then, within a couple days, it should have enough access to air and it's spread so thin that the material is going to turn aerobic and you should be rid of the smell. And then aerobic microorganisms are going to take over in the material.
Okay. So what I'm taking from this basically is like, if it's not done, you got to let it finish composting. So you need to give it the conditions that it needs to do that, essentially.
Yeah. Or, it could be done, but somebody at the compost yard didn't cover the compost pile after they screened it and it just got absolutely soaking wet. Or it's a compost company that doesn't know how to manage compost and it ended up, even though they screened it, it's still smelling like that because of the way they managed it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but yes, if it's hot or smelly, you need to let it age more or get air to it.
Okay, that makes complete sense.
And then, the only other thing would be like what I would consider bad compost would be actually more of a mulch product. And anything, no matter what, you're always getting organic matter. Even if it doesn't have the best biology, is what I'm trying to say. If you don't have good biology in the material, you're at least putting organic matter down, which is going to feed microorganisms that you'll either the soil has or at some point you'll get put back on there. So you're at least feeding the soil some organic matter, which it always needs, or most soils that I see need.
All right, cool. I think there's some great tips in there, Troy. I think if you just think about it in those terms, like, I think we'll be in good shape. I know I've gotten compost that's hot, and I made the mistake of putting it on my field, and it was bad. Like, nothing would grow in it. It would kill seeds and starts, and I was like, at the time, it was like, this is all I had. I had to sort of work with it, but I think one thing is, if you're getting compost from somewhere where it's consistently hot, I guess the best thing is plan ahead, like buy it 3 months before you need it, kind of thing. Is that like a good strategy?
Yeah, and you were mentioning before we started the show here too, how it tends to be that in the summertime, people are purchasing more compost. So at a large scale facility, it's getting turned over faster. And so they're not able to age it as fast. I'm sorry, they're not able to age it as long, and They're moving it out the door too quick. And so it's still hot when it gets to you. So plan ahead as much as you can, or purchase at a different time other than the middle of the summer when it's most likely going to be busy.
Okay. All right, cool. Good advice. And so I guess the takeaway here is trust your gut. If it doesn't look right or smell right, like, you'll probably know.
Yes, trust your gut.
Okay.
I'm an advocate that anybody should be making their compost on site. Like, close the loop. Maybe have to bring in a little bit of materials from outside, but use all the materials that you have got on site and make your own compost.
Yeah, I think it's a lot harder than it is. For a lot of people, like, if you're spending so much time market gardening, for example, like making compost you may not have this time or space to do that. And I think the reality too, like, we're constantly exporting stuff from our farm, right? There's organic matter leaving our farm. So we need input of some sort, right?
Right. Yeah. You're right.
But yeah, I agree. I mean, we compost whatever we can at Raleigh City Farm, and obviously, like at my farm here, when I was farming here, like I fed my chickens a lot of my waste because that turns into eggs. So that's like another story. But yeah, I think learning about composting is important. I'm not the best composter, but yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I use a lot of compost, but I pay for it.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I use weights.
I mean, it's good that you use compost.
Oh yeah, that's like our main input now. We're using compost. We're using a little feather meal, a little alfalfa meal, and that's it for us this year. But yeah, a lot of compost. Anyways, I want to change gears a little bit. Obviously, like, compost teas are a big part of what you do, and I think there's a lot of I have a lot of potential questions about that. And so I got a question here. I think this will sort of kick us off a little bit. This is from Tony Lopez. Anaerobic versus aerobic. Are anaerobic compost teas only for foliar sprays, or can they be used in soil? I'm confused on how to use these concoctions. So I guess that's the first question. So maybe if you want to talk a little bit about aerobic and anaerobic to start.
Yeah, the question was, are anaerobic teas only for foliar? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, either way, I don't use any anaerobic teas.
Okay. Okay.
All of my teas are aerobic, because I'm working with aerobic microorganisms and I'm focusing on aerobic microorganisms. So all extract or teas that I'm making are going to be aerobic, and I want to make sure that they're staying aerobic. And that's the whole point, is that I'm looking at what microorganisms are active. And that's the whole point, is that when you're brewing a compost tea, you're extracting microorganisms into the water and adding food for them to eat and reproduce. So say you've got 1,000 microorganisms that you've extracted into the water. It's going to be a lot more than that, but just use that number. And you're trying to get them to reproduce up to 1 million. And then, so you have this brew time, and that's going to be determinant on the temperature outside, which is, time of year too. So the colder it is, the longer it's going to take to reach peak population, and the warmer it is outside in summer months, it's a lot shorter to brew time to reach peak population. So you brew, you reach a peak population of microbes, and then at a certain point it starts to drop off, and then it rapidly drops off, and you're losing a lot of your aerobic microorganisms, and anaerobic microorganisms take over, and I don't want that. So yeah, to answer your question, I don't ever spray any anaerobic teas or extracts on my plants. I know people are into KNF and the Jadam stuff, which are fermented anaerobic things, but those are more like for nutrients. There's a biochemical reaction, or whatever you want to call it, where you're accessing certain nutrients and pulling those out of whatever material, and doing it anaerobically, and you can use those sprays. But as far as what I'm doing, it's all aerobic.
Okay. I know you just mentioned like KNF, and is it Jadam or I don't know how to pronounce that.
Jadam. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah. Are there other anaerobic teas that would be like that people use? I know you don't use it, but are there other like reasons for doing that? I guess not for like biologically centered teas, right?
There's nothing that I can think of as far as liquid goes.
Okay.
Yeah, the only other anaerobic thing as far as composting or a compost tea is the Bokashi method. And I can't say I know a lot about the Bokashi method, other than that it's completely anaerobic decomposition of material using anaerobes and airtight stuff, so you're locking off, and it can get pretty smelly. I was just going to mention real quick that I was at the vermiculture conference last year in North Carolina, and there was a guy there named Zach something from Colorado, and he had a DNA sequencer that he was able to sequence DNA from different things, and he sequenced DNA from Bokashi, and it came out as 99% bacillus, so like it didn't even hardly have any diversity to it. There's a lot of claims made with Bokashi, and I'm not going to put it down. I don't think it's as great as regular compost is going to be.
I was going to say it's not your jam. I should say it's not your tea, but yeah, not your cup of tea.
It's not my cup of tea.
All right, that was low hanging fruit there. Sorry, that was easy. All right, bad joke. Sorry, dad jokes over here. So have you ever had this is the third question on this. Have you ever had compost tea go anaerobic, and then you like basically put it back through a bubbler and then create aerobic biology? Have you ever had it? Is that something that you've encountered, and is that like a good way to fix it, I guess is the question.
I've never done that. I'm trying to think if I've even tried to do that. It's so inexpensive to make compost tea that it's just so much easier just to dump it out and start over. Like um, it cost me like 25 cents a gallon to make. So at that, I'm not really losing much money.
Okay. All right.
If that.
Okay. Let me ask you a more basic question here too. Why compost teas? Like, why not just use compost?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, Compost is good, like I said, because when you put down compost, it's I like to think of compost as an inoculant. Like when you're putting down compost onto soil, you're inoculating that soil with microorganisms, or you hopefully are, that are then going to move into the soil. Uh, they're going to help reproduce. They're going to help form soil structure. They're going to help cycle nutrients. And then with that soil structure, you're going to get better airflow, better water absorption, and everything like that. So it's good to put down compost because you've got that organic matter, which is going to be a food for microorganisms in the soil. But say you've got 100 acres and you've got, for whatever reason, you've only got like a ton of compost or like a couple cubic yards of compost. You couldn't use a couple cubic yards of compost on 100 acres and get the benefit of that compost. But you could make a compost tea, get the biological benefit from that compost, is what I should say. But you can make a compost tea that only uses a very small portion of that compost itself and get the same biological benefits. So it's much more efficient in material usage. It's more efficient in time usage normally because it's a lot easier to load up a sprayer and spray stuff than it is to load up a bunch of compost and have to spread out compost. So it's more efficient in different ways that way. And you're getting just as many microorganisms out there onto the soil and plant surfaces. And the big benefit is that you can use a compost tea for a foliar coverage, which is basically kind of serving as a protective surface where you've got all these beneficial microorganisms that are on the surfaces of the plant that are going to be creating a barrier for any diseases or pathogens that might be blowing in the wind, that are going to be fighting them off and keeping your plant healthy. So you can't do a foliar application with compost at all.
Okay. So basically it's the compost tea is an inexpensive way to increase biology in your soil, and you can use it in much larger applications. But if you're putting that same compost on the field, you're getting other benefits in terms of organic matter, nutrients, stuff like that. Is that sort of a quick breakdown?
Right. Yeah, so the problem I see a lot of the times is that I'm going into somewhere, we've got really clay soils in Tennessee, which means there's not much organic matter in the soils.
Same here.
Which means there's not a lot of food other than plant exudates. So in the soil, I don't know who's done this research, but according to different things that I've read, the first preferential food for microorganisms are plant exudates, and next down the line is organic matter in the soil. So if you don't have plants in the soil that are putting out root exudates to feed your biology, and you don't have organic matter there, you don't have much for them to survive off of. And with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food and habitat are one of the top three that we need. So if I'm going out and spraying compost tea out on a field that has rows of crops but a lot of bare soil with clay, I'm getting the microorganisms out. But once they get there, they're like, it's like if you showed up to Las Vegas and expected to see everybody there, but it's like a barren wasteland and like nobody's around. There's no food to eat. There's like nothing to really do. So when you're using compost tea, you need to remember that there needs to be organic matter in the soil. So you need to be continuously feeding that soil through cover crops, through mulch, or other ways. That's the benefit of compost, is that if you've got soil, like you and I have clay soils, if we're wanting to get good good structure in those soils, we need to be adding not only the microorganisms, but habitat and food for those microorganisms through organic matter. And cover crops are not only going to provide root exudates that are going to feed the microorganisms, but once they're terminated, the roots are going to die. Plus, you've got the debris on top of the surface, which is going to continue to feed that biology as well. So that's the importance of cover crops, intercrops, and living walkways, is that you've got the constant feeding of biology in the soil.
Okay, that makes complete sense. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to ask some more questions here. I'm getting a lot more questions in the chat, and hopefully I am looking at these questions, but as I said before, and I'm just responding to some people there, I'm going through the Patreon questions first, and then I'll get to the chat questions. And yeah, so this is how we're doing it. We're almost done. We got 2 more questions in here. This is a question about compost from Sarah Ketchum. Felt like we lost some fertility by putting compost on our beds in the fall, where they sat unused until the spring. They were covered with tarps or in hoop houses, but in general, like, is it better if I want to do a big compost addition into the field? Is it better to do it in the fall or the spring, or does it not matter? What do you think?
It's going to depend on where you live. So most people in a temperate climate, I would suggest, and Elaine suggests as well, is to put down compost in the fall, because like I said, you're treating compost as an inoculant. So when you get it down on the surface of the soil, throughout the fall and winter months, you're going to have that biology moving into the soil, especially if you have snow cover. It actually insulates the ground underneath there, where you actually get some more microbial activity, and then that's also going to attract worms, and it's going to help to provide more soil structure in the soil right underneath your compost that you applied it down. So in most circumstances, it would be the fall. But if you're in a warmer climate, or if you're using it in a hoop house or a greenhouse, you're not going to really get those temperature dips, or where things are going dormant like that. And so then, I would just say put down the compost basically whenever you need it, or as early as possible, to let it work into the soil, let the microorganisms work on the soil, like I said. So if most of the people I know are market gardeners, and most of their beds aren't sitting fallow long, they're turning it over into another crop. So they're adding compost at bed flips or whatever. But yeah, if you happen to have a few rows that you're not using, but you plan on using it, I would get the compost down to be letting it work on the soil. So you're getting better soil structure in the layers underneath that compost.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question well. I'm not sure why. Yeah. I'm curious as well about the fertility, but there's a number of factors that could go with that, maybe not even the compost. But.
Yeah, I think it's so hard to answer some of these questions, Troy, and because everyone's situation is different. I mean, some people, we grow all year round here. I'm in Raleigh, and it's like Zone 7B, and we could pretty much grow all year, at least with some basic cover. And if it's not cash crop, we had a cover crop growing or whatever. So I think it's different. Like if you're much further north, then I think, what you said makes a lot of sense to me. Otherwise, just add it as you need it, essentially, I think that's a fair answer. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So here's a last Patreon question here, guys. Thomas Eliasson says, and we kind of talked about this before, but what's the difference in terms of biology and nutrient analysis between compost tea and fermented plant juice? And I know you talked a little bit about that, but if you want to just maybe quickly answer that.
Yeah, so biologically, the ferments are going to be anaerobic microorganisms, where mine's aerobic. And then nutrient-wise, just from what I know about those, most of the fermented stuff are going to more likely, I know people do the eggshell thing to get calcium, so you're mainly getting calcium. So most of those ferments are going to be strictly for one or a few nutrients or minerals, whereas a compost tea, it's all about the biology and providing plants and soils with the biology that's going to have those nutrients and minerals contained within them, but also that biology is going to help plants access those nutrients and minerals in the soil.
So a lot of those mixes, a lot of those mixes are like specific. Like I want to add calcium versus like a more well-rounded mix, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, if you're doing some type of testing or you're noticing deficiencies in your plants, one of those ferments would be good because compost is going to be, the compost tea is going to be an all around more of a biological amendment or whatever you want to call it. Whereas, yeah, if you know you've got a deficiency, I would focus on the deficiency.
All right, makes sense. And the big difference is the aerobic versus anaerobic, and that's a big difference.
Right, yeah, as far as, the biology.
All right, cool. Let's get into some chat questions here. I see Larry Cooper's in here, and hopefully that's the Larry Cooper I know. And if so, good to see you in here, man. And Gene's here. Hopefully he's still here. Bunch of people in here. But let me get some questions from just chatting. Robert Hayes says, how much should we budget for a useful microscope? And do you prefer some sort of grading, et cetera, for optical comparisons, et cetera?
The microscope that Elaine has always talked about is a little over $300, and it's the same microscope that I'm on my second one. I would like to purchase a more expensive microscope, but it's been great for me. It's right now, I think it's $320, and you can find it at microscopenet.com, and it's model M8311. If I'm 99% sure on that. And it should be like $320, and then you can get other deals where it comes with a case, or you can get a package deal where it comes with a camera, or different things like that. But yeah, I mean, $300 and some is pretty affordable for a microscope.
Okay. This is, I don't know what this is, but do you prefer some sort of grading, et cetera, for optical comparisons? Grading? I know,
no.
Is that like the grid that's on the screen? I don't know what that is. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure if that's what he's meaning or not.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't say I know what he means.
All right. I mean, Troy, my microscope experience in my life is like high school biology, and then we did some cell counting when I was a professional brewer for 5 years. We did some cell counts, and that's about it for me. So my microscope knowledge is pretty limited, but okay, good. Thanks for that recommendation. I think that'll point people in the right direction if they're looking for a pretty professional microscope. Robert Hayes also asking, do you have any recommendations for a field guide to nematodes?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Do you have any recommendations for a field guide to nematodes?
To identifying nematodes?
Yeah, just I guess information about them. Yeah.
The University of Nebraska. I've got it saved on my other computer. I can't get it to right now, but I think if you should be able to Google University of Nebraska nematode identification, that should bring it up. And it's got, it shows different types of mouth parts and lists the names of different types of nematodes on there that you can get a good idea of things. Other than that, yeah, there's not a lot out there as far as I know, or not that I've looked for as far as nematodes. That's a good resource. I was going to look it up on my phone, but I don't want to mess up the chat here.
All right, no worries. I don't really have an answer. The Pharmacy Seeds Network is asking, what are you guys paying for considering good compost? I think it varies so much, like depending on where you are and what you get your hands on. So I don't know. I don't even know what to say about that. Like for me, like I kind of only have one option where I am. I just pay what they charge me. So do you have a sense of like what the going rate is for like decent compost out there?
It's crazy. The average across the United States that I know of is like $30 to $40 a yard. There's a guy in California that does worm composting. I think it's the Worm Farm. he sells compost, and I know it has to be good stuff. He sells it for $30 a yard, which seems like pretty inexpensive to me. Whereas most vermicomposts can go for one. I mean, you'd be lucky to find it for $100 a yard. It starts at least $300 a yard normally. And vermicompost has a lot more biology in it. I'm a huge fan of worm composts. I always think it's worth to spend more for that. But yeah, there's a place close to me that sells compost for $60, and it's not worth $30.
Right,
Um,
right.
if you're gonna be buying several yards, I would always recommend to go out and check out the site and see what it is that you're getting to make sure that you're happy with it before you spend that much money. Because I've heard from so many people that they get a delivery and they've already been asking questions about it and haven't been getting the clearest answers, and then it gets dumped, and then they find out something was in it and they didn't really want that in it, and then they're like, great, now you guys just delivered this and dumped it, and I'm stuck with 15 yards that I don't even want.
Yeah, I think another thing I always recommend to people is like find another farmer near you and like find out if they've gotten compost from that place, and then they'll say, oh yeah, don't buy it from that place, or that stuff's good. I think that's always a good judge if you can make that happen. But yeah, I've heard horror stories of people getting compost and then be like, oh, I found out later it's just leaves and like human manure or whatever in it, and it's like, oh man, like that's a tough situation. I think other people need to consider is a lot of times with compost, you're paying for delivery, and a lot of that's like a big add-on. I know like the company I get it from is like an hour drive away, so they charge me quite a bit just to deliver it. So it varies a lot. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Most people are paying more for delivery than they are for the compost.
Yeah. Okay. Here's
Good
a
amount
question
more.
about get material to make compost. Like, what are some good materials? Obviously, in different parts of the country, you're probably going to have different sorts of inputs. Maybe you can talk about like what you've been using.
Um, I usually use. I'm usually just scavenging for materials. I don't believe in paying for materials for compost ever. Um, you can normally find wood chips, even if you have to go get them and load them up yourself. You can usually get wood chips for free. I'm always wanting to use wood chips. I always like to use leaves. I find that leaves are really good fungal food. Like if you're trying to get fungi going in your pile, I mean, wood chips would make sense that they're a good fungal food, but something about leaves that the fungi takes off more easily on leaves. Yeah, wood chips, leaves, straw. I like to include, and then as far as green material, it's normally kind of whatever you have access to. I'm normally having to try and scramble for green material unless, like, I did an experiment with food scrap composting, and I have access to a lot of food scraps, but there's a lot of trash in that also, so I don't, or at least my source. But yeah,
How about manure?
depending on where you're at. What's that?
Well, how about manure?
I've never had any luck with horse manure, even if people have told me that they are antibiotic free and on no medications. I've never had any luck with horse manure. I just haven't. I know there's a lot of people that use horse manure and vermicompost and put out a decent product. But as far as doing thermophilic compost, I've never had much luck with horse manure. I like cow manure. Basically any other animal than horse manure.
Okay.
I like to use, as long as they're not on antibiotics. So you wouldn't want to use manure from cows that are, or any type of livestock that's on antibiotics, because antibiotics are fighting against the bios that we're trying to get going. And also cattle and feedlots can be on diets that are high in salts, and salts also are detrimental to microorganisms. That's another food preservation analogy. So we try to we put salt on hams to preserve ham from being broken down by microorganisms, and that's another reason we don't want to ever include salts. So all synthetic fertilizers are salts, and they're harmful to microorganisms.
That makes sense. And I've also heard about some situations where people are getting horse manure or other manures that the animals were eating grass or other things that were sprayed, and so some of those pesticides can go through. I don't know if you had any experience with that or heard about those, but I've heard about some of that stuff before.
Yeah, there's a big issue right now. So yeah, horses can the government sprays ditches with aminopyrrolid, and other people use aminopyrrolid and other herbicides that are persistent herbicides that a horse can reach through. Even if you're not spraying, your horse or cow can reach through to the ditch that's been sprayed by the government along the road and eat that grass, and then that herbicide can persist into the animal's poop and go on to kill plants. And it can affect plants as low as 1 part per billion, which is, if I remember correctly, something online said it's like 1 drop in an Olympic-sized pool. Yeah. So yeah, that can affect a plant as low as that, and most of the tests for those things only go down to 10 parts per billion. So yeah, to get back to the question, basically just try and find a diversity of green material. I would say that I've found through my own little research, like looking at things under the microscope, things that are aquatic, either plants or animals, tend to have more protozoa and nematodes. So like we looked at some duck poop underneath the microscope one time, and it was just swarming with bacterial feeding nematodes. It was the most nematodes I've ever seen underneath a slide. It was just covered, and it was from duck poop. So like, get some duck poop in your compost. Or I looked at, there's a place called, I hope I'm getting it correct, Northeast Compost, out of Connecticut. And I'm sorry if you're watching and I got that wrong, but they do a lot of sea life. Like if I remember correctly, he does popcorn, and that's not sea life, but they're in Connecticut. They're right by the ocean, so they get a lot of like ocean type waste, food waste type stuff. And they had some really good biology. There's just something about, again, like I said, that this biology is always contained within water. So it's kind of like the more aquatic things, the more species you're going to get, or more populations you're going to get of what we're kind of looking for here.
So maybe that makes sense with duck poop, because I've had ducks before and I was rotationally grazing them, and like, because they drink so much water, their poop is like way more liquidy than, let's say, chickens. And it spreads so well. And man, I feel like they increase fertility so much faster than chickens do with the same like impact. So yeah, I'm good to know that microscopically duck poop is good too, because I definitely saw that for sure. Yeah. All right. What were you going to say? Sorry, I cut you off. I want to talk about duck poop. So.
No, that's it. It's basically just trying to get as a diverse mix as possible of feedstocks. I can't think of any other details other than that, but yeah, I always use wood chips.
Okay. Yeah, I think it depends on what you get your hands on. I think that's really the bottom line. And I think what you said is good, that you shouldn't be paying for this stuff. Like, try to get, and I say this a lot, like with people that I'm teaching about farming, and on my channel too, I talk a lot about regenerative practice in general, like whatever we can use that's like a waste stream from our society or from our community, and we could turn that into soil and grow food with it. Like that's what we should be striving for. So I really like what you're saying. Like, you shouldn't be paying for this stuff.
Yeah, and I'm always trying to network and get the word out there, like looking for, if I know somebody that does tree work, I'm like getting their card to get wood chips from them or whatever waste source. I mean, there's a lot of waste, what's considered waste, right, that should be considered a resource, just like you're saying. Yeah. You have to get creative and make some phone calls.
Okay, but I think the basic is that you need to understand how all of these things work together and like what you could substitute for what and those sorts of things. I think that's the learning curve there.
Yeah.
Okay. Question here from Avoda Family Farms. Do you have much experience putting amendments or fertilizer in compost? And I'll add to that, like, basically, are you adding other amendments and fertilizer besides like the waste streams we're talking about in your compost? Are you doing that? And then I'll also ask you about like, I'll let you answer that question first.
Yeah. So I don't add anything to my compost. Um, I would. I don't like. Again, I don't like spending money on any of the inputs for my compost. But yeah, like throwing some feather meal in there or some kelp or something like that, I think is always good. I always go for like the most natural products and the most organic. So feather meal, kelp, fish hydrolysate, or any type of fish stuff, things like that.
Okay.
In my compost tea,
That was
I
going to be my
do
next
add,
question. Yeah.
yeah, after brewing, I add azomite, and I don't even add a ton of it. I just add a couple cups into my large spray tank and mix that in with the compost tea that I'm diluting down, just so I know that I'm getting all the micronutrients and minerals. Yeah, so like Elaine talks about it's a very controversial statement that she makes that all soils contain all the nutrients and minerals that a plant could need. It's just a matter of accessing it. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think a lot of times because the biology, it's going to take a while for the biology that's going to access those nutrients and minerals. It could be a few years before you get fungi going that's going to tap into whatever rock that's going to provide you with more phosphorus and stuff. So yeah, you're gonna, even if you do add compost, it's good to add some amendments that are going to provide you with minerals or certain nutrients that you might need.
Okay. And so that will probably depend a lot on like what's already available in that compost and in your tea, I'm guessing. But I see like, I see some people making compost tea recipes and they put in like a whole concoction of things. Like, I don't even know. I mean, I haven't been doing this, so I don't have any experience with that. But like, you're just saying basically like good compost, make tea out of it, because you're really trying to get the biology. That's the thing with the teas, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I'm never thinking I should reframe it. I do in my compost tea in the springtime. In my compost tea I always use humic acid and I use fish hydrolysate, and then I usually in the spring I will add feather meal, because feather meal is the highest form of organic nitrogen that you can buy. So plants need more nitrogen in the spring. So I'm normally using that in the spring, whereas in the middle of the summer and latter half of the year, I'm using some type of kelp, because it's going to have a lot more other nutrients and minerals in there.
Okay.
But other than that, I'm strictly focused. It's all about the biology. Like, the only reason I'm adding what I am into the compost tea is because it has an effect on the biology, and I'm strictly focusing on what biology is in there and how can I enhance that biology.
Okay, but I kind of like that approach too, where you're saying like, hey, like eventually this stuff will be available, but if I can add some to my tea that I'm spraying out somewhere and get more of an immediate impact, I think that's cool. I think that helps whatever you're trying to grow.
Yeah. Well, there's some things that you may not be able to add to tea, but you could possibly sprinkle on the soil and then spray with tea to like activate it. I had a lady last summer. I went and sprayed her small raised bed gardens in Nashville. It was just like a yard or whatever. It wasn't like a farmer. It was just a lady. I'm sorry, it wasn't just a lady. I shouldn't act like she's not important. It was a woman with a nice garden and raised bed gardens. So I sprayed all of her stuff, and then it was like a week later, I checked back with her for some reason, and she's like, "Oh, well, your compost tea burned my tomatoes," and I was like, I didn't say it like that, but I didn't want to argue it. But I was thinking, like, there's absolutely no way that my compost tea could burn your tomatoes, because like I use a half a cup of whatever in 50 gallons, and I was using like 10 gallons of tea. So like the foods that I had added would have been like a few tablespoons of humic acid and a few tablespoons of fish hydrolysate. There's no way that's going to burn her tomato plants. Right. But what she had done, she had put down, I believe it was bone meal. It was either bone or blood. Maybe it was blood meal. It was one that's high nitrogen. Doesn't matter. She was using it as a pest deterrent. She had ants, and so she sprinkled all this blood meal around her tomatoes as a pest deterrent. And then she didn't tell me that she had done that. So I sprayed all my tea on there. Well, the tea activated. It's a really good story because it proves that it activates what you put on there, the tea activated that blood meal, shot all that nitrogen into the plant and burned the heck out of our tomato plants.
That makes
So you
complete
could,
sense. Yeah.
you can sprinkle blood meal, feather meal, whatever out onto your ground, and then come back with a tea and apply it, and activate that into the soil on your plants.
Right, but I think what you were saying before, you were saying like you might add a little bit of feather meal in the spring or some azomite, things where you can get that application out in the field with the same application essentially.
Right, but again, like I'm using with that feather meal, that's what I'm trying to get across is like in 50 gallons of water, I'm using half a cup of feather meal. There's no way that like it's having that big of a difference, but it is some nitrogen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But most of these people with the recipes are like, dumping bunches of stuff in there.
Yeah, I've seen that, and I'm always like, how do you know? I don't. I don't know. Yeah,
Right,
I see a lot.
yeah.
I see a lot of that stuff. Well, it's good to know that you can keep it pretty simple. All right, cool. I'm gonna move on. Try to get some more questions here. Troy, you cool for a couple more questions? I know it's after 9 already.
I'm good for a while. I can keep going as long as you want. It's up to you.
All right. Let's take some more questions here. A lot of comments. Hey, if you guys are watching this, hit the like button. That would be cool. Oh, there aren't many questions. There are a lot of comments here. Sean Sabo is asking about adding a heavy layer of compost prior to winter. I think we sort of talked about that before. They're in zone 5, 6, so that might make sense.
Yeah.
And then maybe a half inch prior to planting. That seems reasonable.
Yeah, that sounds good.
This Beth is asking, what's the ratio of water to rabbit dropping for fertilizer? I'm not really sure what the question is here. I have 200 pounds and want to make sure I don't use it too much or not enough. So I guess they want to, add water to rabbit poop and then use that as fertilizer. I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, you'd probably say compost it first, I would guess.
I would, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so compost tea actually, they've changed some of the regulations around it regarding like organic things, but at least as of like 5 and 10 years ago, they were going off of old research that I think it was Columbia University. I can't remember what university it was, but the research that they were using for compost tea was actually using manure. So they had put manure in water, and we're calling that compost tea when it was actually manure tea. So I'll while we're talking about compost tea and while we're this whole thing, compost tea is when you put compost in a bag, in a mesh bag or something like that, and agitate it in water. It's when you use compost, not soil, not manure, not anything else. Compost. So when people are putting manures in bags and things like that, and I know I'm not hearing this towards for a question because I know that wasn't what it was, but I just want to make sure that there's a clarification with everyone, because manure can breed E. coli and different bad things that are going to be pathogens to plants and people. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that, like, if you're using manure in water, it's a manure tea. Or if a lot of people are like, oh, I need a lot of fungi, I should go get a soil from the forest that has a bunch of fungi in there and put that in my compost tea. Well, that soil hasn't necessarily gone through the compost process, and so you could potentially be introducing pathogens or something like that from the soil into your compost tea. I just wanted to make that clarification. But other than that, I have absolutely no idea how much water to add to rabbit.
Right.
Manure.
I mean, that's the reason why that 90-120 rule is there for adding manure to your field, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Rhonda and Josh Waito says, my compost never seems to finish. everything seems to be really good as far as heat and moisture, but then it all stops and the material is not completely decomposed. Obviously, you don't. It's hard for you to tell, really. But are there any sort of common issues that make a compost pile just stop in the middle, like it heats up or something, and then just kind of doesn't finish out?
The only thing that comes to mind is that if they have like excessive brown, like a whole lot of brown material compared to green material, that so the green material is going to have more nitrogen, and nitrogen is what microbial activity in a compost pile is what creates heat, in case people don't know that. So when your compost pile heats up, what's happening is that these microorganisms are eating and reproducing, and that's creating heat from all that activity. There's so much happening that it's creating heat. And most of that activity comes from the nitrogen in a pile. And so when you have nitrogen or high nitrogen, they're going to eat through that, and that's what creates all those high temperatures. And then you start to cool down, the microbial activity starts to lessen because they've eaten through all that nitrogen. So what it sounds like possibly could be happening is they've burned through the nitrogen, and there wasn't a whole lot of nitrogen in the compost, and now it's just a lot of brown material it's just going to take a long time to age anyway, just like wood chips take a long time to break down compared to a blade of grass.
Okay, so more nitrogen.
Yeah, or make sure that it's moist. If the pile were to dry out, it's going to decrease the activity again, like I was talking about. You want to make sure and have moisture there so that your microbes can be active.
Oxygen
and air. Yeah, air too.
Okay.
One other quick thing that could be, you with compost, you want to always, as far as like thermophilic compost and getting your compost hot, you need to have a thermal mass of 3 or 4 cubic feet. So if you were to have a smaller pile than that, that could also heat up to 130, 140 degrees in a few days, and then like quickly lose temps and drop temps and not really hold temperatures anymore because it's so small and doesn't have the thermal mass.
Okay,
that's one other potential.
All right, cool. Carolyn here is asking, I'm making my first compost under my rabbit hutch, so the rabbits are always adding to the compost pile. Is this a good? Is this a bad idea? Why not?
It's not a bad idea, but you have to realize that you're continuously adding nitrogen into your compost, so you're always continuously starting over. So it would be like running a race and just continuously getting to the starting line and not ever getting to the finish line.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, anytime you're composting, if you don't have enough materials, it's good to save your brown materials aside, save your green materials aside, and just keep saving them until you have enough, and then you would have enough thermal mass to make a pile that's 3 or 4 feet big, and put your rabbit manure in there.
Okay.
I go up the road and get rabbit manure from a lady, and she puts 5-gallon buckets underneath her rabbits, and then I go up there and collect the poop from it, and then you got that urine-soaked hay too. That's good with it. It's got lots of nitrogen.
Yeah, totally. Okay, cool. It's just about finding that balance. So if they're better to collect the poop and then mix it yourself at the right ratio rather than making it all in one. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So Rhonda and Josh are also asking about ratios when you make your tea. Like, I don't know if you mentioned this, like how much compost for how much water? Is that like a...
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about that?
It always depends. It depends on the quality of your compost. So with my compost, it's got good biology. I usually use like per 5-gallon brew, I'll do 3 or 4 cups of compost to 5 gallons. And I always go by volume when I'm measuring out compost, not by weight, because the moisture content can mess up the weight. In a 50 gallon, so I was just explaining to someone earlier today, the higher you go in water content, you don't have to use the equivalent amount. So like I said, 3 cups per 5 gallons. If you were to do 20 gallons, you wouldn't necessarily need um, 12 cups of compost, you could use a little bit less than that. Or, as you keep going up in water, you don't need to use the equivalent amount of compost. You can lessen that. And I mean, it's a lot of everything depends because everybody's compost is different. The temperatures are always different. The foods are different. There's so many variables with that.
But that's a good starting place, I guess.
But normally I do 3 to 4 cups per 5 gallons, or if I'm doing a 20-gallon brew, I'll use like 12 cups and 10 to 12 cups. And if I'm doing like a 50-gallon brew, I'll use like a gallon or a little bit more, which is like 16 cups.
Okay. I know you talked a little bit about vermicompost before, but Caroline's asking, what about mushroom compost? Do you have a lot of experience with that?
I do. Well, what's the question?
What's your opinion about it?
Like how good it is?
Yeah. Like, do you like it? Do you not like it?
I do. Yeah, I do. It depends on where it comes from. So, there's a lot in Pennsylvania, there's a lot of commercial mushroom facilities, but a lot of those places are using fungicides to keep other fungi down while they're trying to grow their crop fungi. I don't know what you call that. Cash fungi, cash mushroom. Anyway, I've got a friend here in town who owns a mushroom operation, and he sells mushroom compost, and we're trying to get some brew kits going that we can sell using his mushroom compost, and it's got great biology in there. Checking the biology, like you would think there would be a lot of fungi, and there's not necessarily a lot of fungi, but there's a lot of other things. There's good bacteria, there's good protozoa, and there's especially good nematodes, at least in my friends. Okay. So yeah, there's good biology in that.
Okay.
One thing to think about that, again, I mentioned before, we're always wanting diversity. And a big part of that is like, depending on the temperature outside, when it's 90 some degrees, there's going to be certain microorganisms that are active and eating and reproducing. And then like, if it drops down to 50 at night, they're going to slow down or be inactive, where another set of species or whatever of microorganisms are going to be active and working. So that's why we want to have a good diversity. I got lost for a second there when I was talking about that.
It's all good.
Anyway, so that's the whole reason behind having good diversity of materials and microorganisms.
Okay. We just got a couple more questions here, and I'll probably try to wrap it up soon just because we've been on for a while. Lindsay Russell's asking, and we talked about this before, but how much time would you say it takes to unlock nutrients that are already in the soil, like Dr. Ingham says? A year, several years? I guess maybe it depends. You sort of talked about this before. It depends on, what the soil's like and what nutrients need to be unlocked.
Right. I mean, again, that's extremely dependent on a lot of variables. So, and dependent on the nutrients. So, I mean, more of the NPK general nutrients are going to be probably more available, I would think. But yeah, so a lot of these, it's going to take a lot of the micronutrients or minerals. It's going to take getting fungi into the soil, or more fungi that's going to be growing deep and working away at bedrock and things like that, and getting access to tapping into that and grabbing those nutrients and sending it up towards the plant.
Okay.
I don't have a good answer for that, and
I think it's hard to answer that question, but like you were saying, like if you need those nutrients within the next few years, like make sure you don't just rely on long-term solutions for something you need now too. So I think that's important.
Right. Yeah. I think that if you're noticing that you're getting better soil structure, the faster that you can get soil structure in a bad soil, like our clay soils, the faster you can get better structure in there, the faster you're going to get access to more nutrients and minerals.
Makes sense. Okay. Another question here.
And the biology is looking to do that.
Yep. You mentioned not adding salt to any of your mixtures, but what about Epsom salt? Hear a lot about Epsom salt enabling plants to increase nutrient uptake. Any opinion about Epsom salt?
Yeah, I've been curious about that myself, because I know people use Epsom salt for like I know people use them for hydrangeas to change the like pH of the soil or whatever. I can't answer that. No, I don't know how salt, like when people use salts in that way, it affects plants. Because yeah,
Okay.
people use ocean water as well and have gotten results with like using ocean water that does have some salt. I mean, obviously ocean water has salt in it. And, uh, I don't know what that salinity, how it affects plants, but yeah, normally any salt is going to have a negative effect on microorganisms.
Okay. So maybe more about pH in that situation, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it true that when you squeeze a handful of soil or compost that there's no more drops of water comes out? That's safely about 45% moisture and maybe ideal for making good compost. Is there like a rule of thumb for like just like squeezing compost and how much water comes out?
Yeah. I actually just posted about that. If anybody wants to go check it out on my Instagram, a few days ago, I posted the method. So you grab a fistful and squeeze it, and if you get like 1, 2, 3 drops of water coming out the bottom of your hand or water coming out between your fingers, that's roughly 50%. If you were to send it off to a lab, it's going to be variable, but as far as what we're trying to do, anytime you have that amount of water in your compost pile, it's a good meter to go off of and to use that to gauge. But yeah, I don't know how deep you want me to get into that.
That's okay. That's good. All right, Troy, we're coming up on an hour and a half here. I think we have some more questions here, but I think we could probably keep going all night, and I'm probably going to cut it off now if that's cool. I just want to say thanks for coming out tonight and answering questions and nerding out about compost. And I know you've been on Jesse's podcast as well, or I don't know if you were with Jesse or Jackson. I can't remember, but
Jesse, yeah.
Jesse, yeah, I really appreciate the contributions and to the community and everything. And I also have to say your shirt's amazing, so thanks for wearing that tonight too. But Troy, thanks so much, man. I'm sure we'll try to do some more stuff in the future. I really appreciate everything you're doing for the community.
Cool. Thanks, Josh.
All right.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.
All right, guys. So that was Troy Hickey of Living Roots Compost Tea, and go check out his work. There's descriptions down below, stuff in the description. There's his website, Instagram, all that stuff, and just a wealth of knowledge. A very cool dude. And thanks so much for watching and tuning in. This will also go up on the Patreon account in terms of an audio file if you want to listen to this another time and have that available for you guys too. We're trying to do whatever we can so that you guys can get as much value out of these things as possible. So again, please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And please consider giving to the Patreon account. And again, coming up in 2 weeks, we will have Alex and Yoko of Osawaga Farm. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you soon.